Joining us. There we go. Audio always helps us. Michael, such a pleasure. I know you've flown in especially for this summit this week. You're back home off for a wedding tomorrow, but lots to talk about today. So thank you so much for joining us. As we just heard, Michael Pollan, one of the great food experts, renowned authors of our time. You've been leading the way on the food revolution for, I think, 20, 30 years. And what I find so fascinating about your work is that really you have shown us that food is about so much more than just food. It's about culture, politics, energy, as well as health. So as we come here today at the World Future Green Economy, where all of these systems are colliding, where we have climate change, fragile ecosystems, diet-related diseases, and more, what do you see as the main core challenge of our food system at this point in time?
Good question, Katie. There are so many challenges. There is the challenge to our public health, represented by the way we're eating. We're eating way too much ultra-processed food. 70% of the diet is ultra-processed. This is food that's been engineered to be irresistible and addictive, and it is. Diseases, I think it's leading to mental health difficulties. So you've got the public health challenge there, and then you have the environmental challenge. As I said in my speech this morning, the way we're growing food, which should be a solar technology since it's ultimately based on photosynthesis, we have nevertheless taken it off the sun to a large extent and put it on oil. And we are using, we're using enormous amount of resources to grow the food, and the food we're growing is not healthy. So it's a problem, and we still have, of course, hunger in many places. Which we shouldn't overlook, because in the developed world, we have too much food, actually. One of the ironies of the system is that it's overproducing. We constantly hear about, we need to produce more food for a growing planet. But the challenge, certainly in the United States, and I think it's true in the EU as well, is getting rid of all the calories we're growing. We've become way too efficient in the way we're growing food. And one more challenge I would raise is food waste. Yeah. Something like 40% of the food that we grow in the United States is never eaten. And if we talk about feeding a hungry world, we have to address food waste.
And I think you're absolutely right, what you were saying about food production. We have enough food, but it's not necessarily getting to the right places at the right time. I want to talk about some of your work. You've written so many books, 10, 20 books, etc. The Omnivore's Dilemma, one of your most famous one, that was launched almost 20 years ago now. And in fact, when it first came out, it really did spark a food revolution, not just in the local food markets, even we saw Netflix documentaries as well. And big focus talking about ultra-processed food. You mentioned there, more than 70% of our diet still coming from ultra-processed food. Obesity has tripled since the 1970s as well. We also know in the Gulf that heart disease is coming a lot earlier than other parts of the world, about 10 years as well. Tell me, with all this information, do you feel that the book changed the conversation, but not necessarily the behavior? And if you were to write it again today, would you do anything differently?
So Omnivore's Dilemma was my introduction to food and how we eat and what's kind of wrong with it. And the book is a very simple story of, it's a series of detective stories of tracing a single meal back to the earth. Yeah. One was an industrial McDonald's meal, another was an organic meal. So I learned about the different food chains that feed us and their pluses and their minuses. The book sparked a conversation, and I think stimulated a lot of interest in local food, organic food, pasture-raised meat, and it certainly built some markets. I mean, I saw that happen, but I would be kidding myself to think it made big changes at the national level. Our food system, so it's easy to think that food, like other businesses, is a free market system, but agriculture is not free market. It has not been since the Great Depression. Farmers grow what the government incentives encourage them to grow. And in America, that's grow as much as you can of corn and soy, maize and soy. And they do. And why those crops? Because they're the basis of processed food, and it's what we feed to animals. So it's the basis of meat. Governments have a very strong interest in cheap food. Going back to the French Revolution, when food prices rise, presidents lose their heads, kings lose their heads. So cheapness at any cost has really been the motto of the food system. I don't think that's changed at all. I don't think my book had an effect on it. The closest it had in terms of influencing the national dialogue was Barack Obama, who really understood the food system, had accepted the kind of critique of what's wrong with it. But as soon as he felt any pushback from agribusiness, which he did in 2010, he dropped any efforts to reform the food system. And it became Michelle Obama's project. And she planted an organic vegetable garden, which she actually didn't even dare call organic for fear of offending agribusiness. And she made some modest steps toward reforming school food. But I think he realized that the issue was a dangerous one. There is, the food industry. If you take together big food, and which processes all the food, and big ag, which grows all the food, it's no president has wanted to confront it. Not even the current president.
I was about to say, a lot of debate, isn't there?
Well, the tariffs have been a disaster for our farmers. And it's the one industry he's willing to send billions of dollars of bailout money to, because he knows that it's a powerful industry that he can't afford to alienate.
And of course, there was a lot of criticism from President Trump over former President Biden about inflation. A lot of focus on the cost of eggs as well, which looks like is still rising in many parts of the world. I want to pick up on what you were saying, though, because you've said in the past that industrial food is really just fossil fuel in disguise. I mean, the numbers are huge. Globally, food systems pump out around a third of global emissions. Yet we've seen the yields of staples. We have seen them rise since the 60s and the 70s, even as fertilizer use has leveled off. So do you see that food is mostly still an energy problem, or has the situation become more nuanced than that?
No, it's still an energy problem, and the big part of it is the fertilizer, which is a fossil fuel product, of course. It's made and it takes a huge amount of electricity and fossil fuel to fix nitrogen in a form that plants can use. And we still over-fertilize our crops. Farmers, I've talked to them, they say, well, we see it as crop insurance. We put on twice as much as they tell us to. And of course, as I mentioned this morning, whatever doesn't get taken up by the plant, when the rain comes, turns into nitrous oxide, which is a really serious greenhouse gas we don't talk about nearly enough. Much more powerful in its heat-trapping abilities than CO2. So it's still an energy problem, without question. But we also see some solutions on the horizon. There is now regenerative agriculture. That term, which is still vague and not well enough defined, is an attempt to improve on organic. So organic was a very important movement beginning in the 60s and 70s, and it did shine a light on the problems with pesticides especially. But the big environmental problem then was, of course, not climate change. Nobody knew about climate change. The big problem was toxic chemicals. And organic got them out of the food supply, the organic food supply, to a large extent. But organic was designed to address an environmental problem, but not the one we have now. And organic, in terms of climate change, is not always the best solution, because the way you deal with weeds in organic agriculture is lots of tillage. And every time you till or plow, you're releasing greenhouse gas from the soil. So regenerative agriculture is an attempt to improve on organic by focusing in a laser way on the climate issues. So it recommends much less tillage, cover crops, which is to say never leave the soil bare, which most farmers do in the winter. So minimal tillage, also a much greater diversity of crops, planting hedgerows, which capture a lot of carbon and stop erosion. It's a whole menu of techniques still to be perfected. There's still a lot of research we need to do. But if you organize your farming methods around sequestering carbon, you begin to turn back the problem. And you begin not just to mitigate emissions, but actually roll them back. And I have been on farms that practice this, and some of them have accumulated a foot of new soil that didn't exist 40 years ago. It can be done. It can be done in one generation. And it can be done in animal agriculture, and it can be done in plant agriculture. So I find that really hopeful. Scale is a real issue. All these superior techniques right now are more labor intensive, and labor on the farm is a big problem. So we're going to have to figure out ways to mechanize regenerative agriculture.
And that was going to be my next question, because by 2050, we will have close to 10 billion people's mouths to feed. Now, you've always had that very iconic line, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. So when we look at the future and we look at how to feed almost 10 billion mouths, there's certainly a lot of interest in regenerative farming. There are critics who say its adoption has been small, scaling it is a challenge as well. Where are the parts of the world that are getting it right? Where can we look from? Where do we have the proof that it is working?
So the Feed the World argument has been used to promote the worst of industrial agriculture.
And of course, there's a big focus.
And GMOs. And whenever you are trying to justify to farmers that they should grow more than is good for them because the prices crash when they have surpluses, people talk about feeding the world and the 10 billion mouths. And it overlooks some very important facts, which is that in a lot of the world we have too much food. In the United States, government policy is all about figuring out ways to give away corn. So we feed corn to our cars. 10% of gasoline in America is corn, which is bad for the engines and in fact takes more energy to produce than it gives you. It's absolutely insane. And there are other giveaway programs like that. The problem is the calories are not in the right place. So it's an equity issue. It's not a technology issue. The other point is that yes, we will have shortages when there are 10 billion people if we insist on eating the way we're eating now, which is to say a very high meat diet. If you remove beef from the equation, and people stop eating as much beef as we're eating and either start eating substitutes or other meats, you will have such a surplus of grain that you could feed several planets. Beef is consuming, and dairy is consuming a tremendous amount of grain. And so the issue is not how much food we're producing, it's what we're doing with it. And it could be a lot more rational. It's very unpopular to say eat less beef. It's
particularly in this part of the world, particularly Asia as well. It's very much tied to culture as well. Do you think the government should be stepping in, much like the government has intervened in different parts of the world about the use of tobacco? Do we need something as drastic as the government coming in talking about new food regulations? Recently, we've seen new regulations for schools as well, particularly in Abu Dhabi, some parts of Dubai, no more unhealthy food at schools as well. Is that the kind of thing that we need?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of what made tobacco like littering verboten, something you didn't do, was public education. And in the case of tobacco, yes, finally it was regulation and taxation. And I'm not sure I'm in favor of taxing beef. I think we should try other things first. But I think more public education. I don't think people realize the carbon footprint, the amount of oil they're eating when they eat a McDonald's Big Mac or something like that. So let's start by, you can change social mores. We've seen it happen. When I was a little kid, when you had any litter in the car, from your McDonald's meal or whatever, you just threw it out the window. People threw cigarette butts out the window. Cigarette smoking, because of some minor regulations, like you can't do it in certain restaurants, lost its glamour. And now you see people huddling outside office buildings in the winter in New York, smoking their cigarettes, looking guilty. So social mores can change. And I think with more knowledge, there's a good chance that could happen.
But I'm going to challenge that slightly, because I think for a lot of us, I think the public education is out there. We know, you mentioned eating a Big Mac. I think most of us know, starting our day off or finishing our day with a Big Mac is not healthy. And yet we mentioned the stats earlier, 70% of our diets are ultra processed. Obesity levels continue to rise. I would say most of us are more educated than ever. Is the solution on changing individuals' behavior? Are we blaming the government that something we should be taking more personal responsibility for?
Yeah, I mean, personal responsibility is key here, and with everything having to do with climate. As the president was saying before we came on, we have to begin in our daily lives. We have to set the example. I've always, wondered, does it really matter if I change my light bulbs to LED or stop eating meat? And I decided it does matter. It gives you authority to talk to your neighbors about it. It's really the beginning of a social contagion. So I do think we have that power. I will say, though, in the case of these kind of food habits, they're very hard to change as adults. And I think the focus really needs to be on kids in school. I think in our country, Alice Waters has created, the chef, has created something called the Edible Schoolyard, where kids in middle school, ages 10 to 12 or so, learn how to grow food. There's a garden. It's part of their school day, and then they learn how to cook. And it's their favorite part of the day, and they are learning how to eat real food instead of ultra-processed food. And they take these habits home to their parents, who may have never seen a leaf of kale, and suddenly there's kale. And so I think we have to begin with the kids. And I think that what she calls edible education has to be a part of the curriculum. It is as important as anything else you learn in school. How to eat, what it means, what are the implications of your food choices, how does food connect you to other people, to the land. I think this is crucial information for all of us, but we've got to start young, because you're not going to get a 50-year-old to change. If they love hamburgers, it's going to be very hard. Maybe you persuade them to try a fake hamburger, but I'm not very optimistic about those.
Definitely our children, I think those little sponges of information, aren't they? Let's focus on this part of the world for a moment. The Gulf, as we know, imports about 85% of its food, and because of that, we have one of the most fragile food ecosystems in the world. Now, we are seeing more local yields from local farms as well. I think we're now producing more than 400 tons of tomatoes, but the cost of doing this is about 30 to 40% higher than importing food. So when we look at building resilience, does it work for a desert economy like this, or do we need to look at something completely out of the box?
Yeah. So I'm a great believer in there's no one solution or one answer to problems like this. I think resilience, which is a very important term in this discussion, argues for having many different food systems, and that even if local food is more expensive, it does create some measure of security. We've seen how trade can be disrupted by a politician almost overnight, and you want to know that you have something to fall back on. So I think it's important to have local food, it's important to have imported food, it's important to don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Okay.
That very much applies to food,
Okay.
and it is a food metaphor.
Okay, I like that pun there as well. And that's the thing, I think being able to try and solve that food, water, energy mix is certainly very challenging, particularly in this part of the world where desalination is so energy intensive. Let's talk a little bit about the future of food, because in the Botany of Desire, you talked a lot about humans and plants being able to co-evolve. Now we're seeing these huge new biotech firms that are editing DNA, patenting seeds as well. Do you see gene editing as the next natural chapter, or is it something a little bit more dangerous than that?
No, I think gene editing has potential. I've been very critical of genetically modified food, which is the generation before gene editing, as you know. Not because I thought the technology was dangerous, but because it was being applied in a very narrow way. In other words, most genetically modified crops in the market today are Roundup-ready crops. These are crops that have been engineered to withstand glyphosate pesticide. Why did Monsanto focus on that? Well, because they had the patent on glyphosate and they wanted to sell as much of it as they possibly could. There was nothing for the consumer in these products, nothing for the farmer in these products. It was a way to sell pesticide. And the result of the GM we have, the genetic modified organisms we have, is not food that's healthier for us. It's not higher yields. It's food that's more convenient for farmers to grow. And it's food that has higher and higher levels of glyphosate in it. So the net result of this experiment over the last 20 years is if we all took a test, you would find you're carrying more glyphosate in your body. Oh. Is glyphosate a bad thing? Well, the jury is still out. The European Union certainly thinks it is. The institutions that study cancer think it is, and there's links to lymphoma. So I'd rather not eat glyphosate. So that's my objection to GMOs. They have not been used for a public good.
Okay, let's talk a little bit about lab-grown meat, because there are some people out there who say lab-grown meat might or will cut emissions by up to 90% if it's powered by renewables. On the flip side, there's others who say, actually, with all these huge laboratories, their energy output will be worse than cattle, which I think is around 1/5 globally of emissions. Tell me, is this a real transformation? Is it just another shiny promise with all these hidden issues? What are your thoughts on that?
So I looked at this, and I toured some lab-grown meat facilities in the Bay Area, and I was very excited by the prospect of making meat in a new way that doesn't require cows. And but what I saw diminished my optimism about what would happen. Basically, what you're doing here is multiplying muscle cells in a giant vat. These places look like a brewery where beer is being brewed. And but you have to feed them. Quick digression, you never get away from nature, right? I mean, you think you've got some technology, even AI, you think you've like transcended the natural world and the limitations of nature. It never happens. Nature never goes away. Nature always has the last word. So in this case, what are you feeding these cells? Well, you're feeding them a pharmaceutical-grade slurry of nutrients that you have gotten from a soybean field or a corn field, and a company like Cargill or ADM is processing it. The problem is it has to be pharmaceutical grade, which means it cannot have a single bacteria in it. Now, you can do that at a very small scale, and laboratories around the world do it all the time. But to do it on the scale that will be required, because a single bacteria will completely destroy a whole batch, because the bacteria grow faster than the muscle cells. I don't see that happening. Also, the product you get is not actually meat. It's this slurry that you could turn into a chicken nugget or a sausage, but if you try to turn it into a cut of meat, like a steak or something like that, that takes another technology that has not yet been developed. So I hate to say it, but I don't think we're going to see this in our lifetime.
Okay, interesting. I was on the same stage a couple of years ago, actually, debating the future of food, and again, just the incredible changes. I think at that time we were looking at lab-grown fish and other things.
Yeah.
Doesn't sound that appetizing, I have to say, with the slurry as well. Tell me then, where do you see the future of food? When we look at the incredible technology out there today, the advancements, AI, digital technology, where are you confident about today?
Well, I think that, the last kind of rush of capital and innovation in food has been around this meat question. And the people who started these companies were really great idealists, and they were trying to solve the climate change problem. Patrick Brown, the man who started Impossible Foods, was a biologist at Stanford. I knew him quite well, and he decided to give up his tenured position at Stanford to come up with a meat alternative because he realized that meat was a fundamental part of climate change and the loss of biodiversity also. And he came up with the most sophisticated food science and a huge amount of Silicon Valley capital to create this product, which, isn't bad. I mean, I've tried it. It's like, yeah, I mean, it's as good as a McDonald's hamburger, which isn't saying that much. But the public did not embrace it. And, I think that, and the company has really struggled. So we need more innovation in food without question. But we also need innovation on the farm. We need to mechanize sustainable agriculture because we don't have enough people on the land. And the most sustainable ways of growing food right now require a lot of hands-on, the intelligence of the farmer. And so how can we innovate at that level? The problem is that farming has never attracted a lot of capital because the margins are very small. And people in the food business say that, they want to do processing, they want to do retail, they want to do cooking, they want to do everything but growing because the margins are really small. So how are we going to incentivize innovation on the farm, which is what we really need? And I don't know the answer to that, but I think that's where a lot of our energy should be focused.
And funding as well. I'm from Australia. I've been here a while, but I know many farmers back in Australia who've actually, had it in the family for generations. They've stopped because the effects of climate change are too much. And watching all the cattle die, watching all the land completely dry up.
And the horrible droughts in Australia.
Is absolutely horrific. So then how do we deal with, not only, looking at innovation, et cetera, but as we deal with the ongoing changes around the world?
I think we have to celebrate farmers. I think we have to raise their prestige in the culture. Farmers in America for many years were the butts of jokes as being naive or ignorant. In fact, these are really intelligent people who understand things we don't understand about nature and soil, and they are heroes. And we have to treat them that way. We don't treat them that way now. And we need to support them in every way we can, and it's one of the reasons I write a lot about farmers and profile them in Omnivore's Dilemma. And one of the positive effects of that storytelling was a generation of young people in America, people in their 20s, who got into farming. And some of them crashed and burned, but many of them didn't, and they're still doing it, and they're doing it with a sense of mission. And I think that that's part of what we need to do. We have to make farming cool. And it's one of the things that storytellers can do.
Okay, I like that. We've got a few minutes left. As we look ahead to the future, say you and I come back here in 2035, do you think we'll be on this stage? Will we be talking about healthier diets? We'll be celebrating more resilient food supply chains, big developments and big advances in food science? Or do you think that we will be regretting the chances that we missed?
We can't afford to keep eating the way we're eating. We simply can't. When we say something is unsustainable, that's not just a negative term. That means it can't go on because there's some internal problem or contradiction that means it's going to collapse. Industrial agriculture, we can't just say, the critique of it is that it's, destroying the soil and destroying our health. So something will break. And it could be the soil. It could be the quality of the soil now. As yields are going down after years of going up. So we don't have the choice to stay on this path. What drives the change, whether it'll be environmental or public health, I don't know. Probably public health, because economically that is bankrupting countries. We're up to 18-19% of GDP in America is going to health. Most of that money, 3/4 of it, goes to treat chronic diseases linked to diet. The easiest way to change our terrible health situation and the fact that so many people are getting cancer and so many people are getting heart disease at younger and younger ages, as you suggest, would be to change the way we eat. And, you know, I think we'll need to do it. I mean, it's just going to stare us in the face as we get sicker and fatter. So, you know, it's funny how we're able to take on whatever crises becomes the new normal. We've seen that already. I mean, we've already had so many wake-up calls about climate change. You know, fires, floods, droughts. I mean, it's you know, it's the whole catalog of plagues from the Bible. They're here now, and it doesn't necessarily change people's minds. Denial is really powerful, and we've seen it. I mean, we have a president that embodies denial right now around climate change. In terms of public health, I think it threatens to bankrupt us. So I think you will see changes in food. And this whole discussion around ultra-processed food, which is a term, by the way, that didn't even exist when I wrote Omnivore's Dilemma. We talked about junk food or processed food, but ultra-processed food has, and there's now research behind it suggesting that it is uniquely bad for our health. And if you want to do one thing to improve your health, yes, stop eating ultra-processed food. Learn to cook.
And I wanted to ask you about that, because I know you are quite the chef, I hear. I think grilled...
And so are you.
Well, a little bit. My mother was a food scientist, actually. But I know you're a big fan of grilled chicken. In terms of practical strategies for our audience today, tell me, I'd love to know 3 things you never eat and 3 things you try and incorporate into your diet most days.
So you mentioned earlier a line I wrote for a book called In Defense of Food that will be on my gravestone unless I come up with something better. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. That's all you need to know about nutrition. It really is. You don't have to learn about omega-3s or, you know, all the different nutrients that we always like to talk about, protein diets, you know, keto diets, all this kind of thing. Now, when I say eat food, though, that's a little tricky. But wait, isn't it all food? No. I think there are foods we're eating that we should not dignify with that beautiful word. And ultra-processed food would fit in that category. But I'm talking about real food. In terms of my own eating, I actually have stopped eating meat. I eat a limited amount of seafood. I do eat eggs just to get protein. But... and I found giving up meat has not been a hardship. I find I'm healthier as a result. I find that, you know, there's so many wonderful plants to eat. What we're learning about the microbiome and how central that is to our health, I think that's a big problem. That's the microbes that live in your gut. They eat fiber. That's all they like. They don't like anything else. So what is fiber? Fiber is the walls of plant cells. And if you're not eating fiber, you're not feeding your microbiome, which is absolutely essential to your health. If you're eating ultra-processed food or junk food, you're feeding your body, but you're not feeding the trillion the microbes you share your body with. And they're just as important to your health as you. So I think about that when I'm eating, and you know, try to eat a variety of plants in the course of a day, because every plant has a different kind of fiber that supports a different kind of microbe. So I think that's one of the biggest changes in my diet. I miss roast chicken. It was one of my favorite things to cook. But I've learned to cook a lot of other things. Cooking is really important, I think. I think cooking is a political act. It's when we get to take back control of our diet from corporations that are trying to feed us. They are trying to tell you, you can't cook good food, only we can do it. Outsource this critical human act of transforming the fruits of nature into delicious things to eat. So, yeah.
I love that. Cooking is a political act. I'm going to remember that. We have got less than 1 minute left. Tell me, final message for the audience today. If there's one thing you'd like them to do differently to try and protect our food system for generations to come, what would that piece of advice be?
Cut down on your beef consumption. I think it's the most important thing you can do for climate and for your health. And it's not a big deal. There's so many other wonderful things to eat. And that goes for dairy too. Cut down on dairy. And I'll leave you with, eat food, not too much, mostly plants.
Michael Pollan, everyone, let's give him a very big round of applause. Thank you so much today.
Thank you, Katie.
Cooking is a political act. I'm going to remember that. A real honor. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Thank you.